Welcome everybody. Today we're going to be doing some Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. This is the preface, and this is from the Cambridge edition of the works of Immanuel Kant and translated by Paul Guyer and Alan W. Wood. So let's read a little bit and we'll get into Kant's critique. Human reason has the peculiar fate in one species of its cognition that it is burdened with questions which it cannot dismiss, since they are given to it as problems by the nature of reason itself, but which it also cannot answer, since they transcend every capacity of human reason. So what do we get from that? Well, we've got two issues here. Human reason has a particular fate in one species of its cognition that it is burdened with questions. So it's burdened with questions. Okay. And it cannot dismiss them. Since they're given as problems of reason. Okay. And it cannot answer. Since they transcend reason. So what do we have here? Just from this paragraph. We've questions, right? It's burdened with questions, which is, it's not just any specific question, it's burdened with questions. It cannot dismiss them, since they're given to it as problems by the nature of reason itself. Okay. But which it also cannot answer, since they transcend the capacity of reason. So we have an implicit issue is, when we talk about this burdening, Kant is writing this initial 4 lines that it doesn't have a choice. By necessity, these questions will arise. It's caught in this, it's pulled into, by necessity, answering these questions. But because of because of the problems of reason. But it's beyond the limit of its ability. Reason falls into this perplexity through no fault of its own. It begins from principles whose use is unavoidable in the course of experience, and at the same time sufficiently warranted by it. With these principles it rises, as its nature also requires, ever higher, to more remote conditions. But since it becomes aware in this way that its business must always remain incomplete because the questions never cease, reason sees itself necessitated to make refuge in principles that overstep all possible use in experience. Reason sees itself, and again, this is exactly the word that I'm looking for, necessitated. Okay? To take refuge in principles that overstep all possible use and experience. To take refuge in principles that overstep all possible use and experience. Okay? And yet seems so unsuspicious that even ordinary common sense agrees with them. But it thereby falls into obscurity and contradiction. So, okay, we have common sense is not unsuspicious about this. But then it falls into contradiction. Now, a comment on this is, in Hegel's pardon me, Hegel's phenomenology is about this common sense, or natural consciousness, as he would call it. And then showing how common sense, natural consciousness, ordinary consciousness gets into contradiction. And it's very interesting that common sense, doesn't really, is unsuspicious, even that ordinary common sense agrees with them. But then it falls into obscurity and contradiction, from which it can indeed surmise that it must somewhere be proceeding on the grounds of hidden errors. But it cannot discover them. Okay? Cannot discover them. For the principles on which it is proceeding, since they surpass the bounds of all experience, no longer recognize any touchstone of experience. The battle of these endless controversies is called metaphysics. So this, I presume, from Kant, is a reading of the history of philosophy. Reason, what we get implicitly from this is reason is unknown to itself. There was a time when metaphysics was called the queen of the sciences, and if the will be taken for the deed, it deserved this title of honour on account of the preeminent importance of its object. Now, in accordance with the fashion of the age, the queen proves despised on all sides, and the matron outcast and forsaken mourns like Hecuba. And this is the quote here: modo maxima rerum tot generis natisque potens, nunc trabor exul in opis. Ovid, Metamorphoses. And he says, greatest of all by race and birth, I now am cast out, powerless. And again, Kant is writing at a certain time here, and he's saying, well, it was the queen. Metaphysics was the queen, but now it courts despise. Okay. In the beginning, under the administration of the dogmatists, her rule was despotic. And when he is talking about dogmatists, he gives a footnote to, and we're talking about this figure here. Christian Wolff was the central figure of the German Enlightenment. Wolff's most prominent follower, Alexander Gottlieb Baumgarten, was author of Metaphysica, the text used most often in Kant's academic lectures. Baumgarten's text is reprinted in the academic edition. So Christian Wolff is very important, and Baumgarten is very important for understanding Kant and his time. Her rule was despotic, yet because her legislation still retained traces of an ancient barbarism, this rule gradually degenerated through internal wars into complete anarchy. And the skeptics, which is David Hume. And the skeptics, a kind of nomads who abhor all permanent cultivation of the soil, shattered civil unity from time to time. Now, the interesting thing here is Kant is writing this in just the general description. It's very political. Queen of the sciences. The queen provokes despise on all sides. The matron outspoken forsaken mourns like Hecuba. The dogmatist, despotic anarchy. It's very much, people say that Kant is a very lifeless writer, but in here you can see an endless battle for metaphysics. The queen, who was doing well, who was the chosen one, now despised. The rule of the dogmatists, Hume coming in, anarchy. It's like the beginning of a movie. But since there were fortunately only a few of them, they could not prevent the dogmatists from continually attempting to rebuild, though never according to a plan unanimously accepted among themselves. Once in recent times, it even seemed as though an end would be put to all these controversies, and the lawfulness, which is word A, Reichsmastigkeit, of all the competing claims would be completely decided through a certain physiology of the human understanding by the famous Locke. So all these controversies and the lawfulness of the competing claims would be completely decided by a certain physiology of the human understanding. So this is really important. All of these battles were said to be solved by the human understanding. And this is Locke. And the human understanding is going to play a central role in Kant and in Hegel, but also Hume. So what does footnote 4 say? The avowed aim of John Locke was to discover, quote, the original certainty and the extent of human knowledge by tracing the genesis of all knowledge to its origin in experience. An empiricist, quite like Hume. And Hume will show that empiricism has no leg to stand on. But it turned out that although the birth of the purported queen was traced to the rabble of common experience, and her pretensions would therefore have been rightly rendered suspicious, nevertheless, she still asserted her claim, because, in fact, this genealogy was attributed to her falsely. Thus, metaphysics fell back into the same old worm-eaten dogmatism, and thus into the same position of contempt out of which the science was to have been extracted. Again, so Locke purported the queen was traced back to the rabble of common experience. But this genealogy was attributed falsely. Okay, now after all paths, as we persuade ourselves, have been tried in vain, what rules is Tedum, a completely indifferentism. The mother of chaos and night in the sciences, but at the same time, also the origin, or at least the prelude of their incipient transformation and enlightenment, when through ill-applied effort they have become obscure, confused, and useless. So what is this complete indifferentism? Number 5. This is a reference to popular Enlightenment philosophy, such as that of Johann August Eberhard, Christian Fureder, Christoph Nicolai, and Moses Mendelssohn. It emphasized appeals to healthy common sense over rigorous argument, and the popular dissemination of progressive ideas with practical import over the investigation of metaphysical questions towards which they often express contempt. So, this section 5, there seems to be, and it would be interesting research question to look at this common sense here with the Scottish common sense of Thomas Reid. Now, after all paths have been tried in vain, what rules is tedium and incomplete indifferentism, the mother of chaos and night in the sciences, but at the same time also the origin, or at last the prelude of their insipid transformation and enlightenment, when through ill-applied effort they have become obscure, confused, and useless. For it is pointless to affect indifference with respect to such inquiries, to whose object human nature cannot be indifferent. Moreover, however, much they may think to make themselves unrecognizable by exchanging the language of the schools for a popular style, these so-called indifferentists, to the extent that they think anything at all, always unavoidably fall back into metaphysical assertions, which they yet professed so much to despise. Nevertheless, this indifference, occurring amid the flourishing of all sciences, and directed precisely at those sciences whose results, if such are to be had at all, we could least do without, is a phenomenon deserving our attention and reflection. This is evidently the effect not of the thoughtlessness of our age, but of its ripened power of judgment, which will no longer be put off with illusory knowledge, and which demands that reason should take on anew the most difficult of all tasks, namely that of self-knowledge, and to institute a court of justice by which reason may secure its rightful claims while dismissing all its groundless pretensions, and this not by mere decree, but according to its own eternal and unchangeable laws. And this court is none other than the Critique of Pure Reason itself. Now, if you want to understand the Critique of Pure Reason, this is the page to do it. Because Kant is really like a rhetorician. He's standing up, he's saying, he's showing in the preface, using emotive political language, teleological, the Queen, all of this stuff as Carl Schmitt political theology, this sort of eternal battle is going on. And it's in chaos. It's in complete anarchy. Reason doesn't know itself. And what you might, I've asked this myself previously with David Hume. Why does it matter? Why can't we just not be, as Kant says, indifferent? Indifferentism. Because if we have a desire to make the world rational, we have to understand the instrument that we use to make the world rational. So, for instance, Dawkins, a scientist or any scientist, has an object of investigation, whatever it may be, nature, evolution. But what makes it rational is the categories, the logic, the inferences that we use that order the world by necessity. And philosophy is interested in the a priori, is interested in the structure of thought itself. How does experience, a unified experience, come to be? I look out into the world. When I pick up the pen, it drops. Now, Hume says, well, this is just constant conjunction, and we can have no necessary knowledge that this is going to happen. But Kant says this is just an absurd thing. I mean, this is just, we have no necessity, we have no universal knowledge, we can't have any science based on this. So, what do we what is this power of judgment? Now and again one hears complaints about the superficiality of our age's way of thinking, and about the decay of well-grounded science. Yet I do not see that those sciences whose grounds are well laid, such as metaphysics, physics, etc., in the least deserve this charge. Rather, they maintain their old reputation for well-groundedness, and in the case of natural science, even surpass it. This same spirit would also prove itself effective in other species of cognition if only care had first been taken to correct their principles. In the absence of this indifference, doubt, and finally strict criticism are rather proofs of a well-grounded way of thinking. Our age is the genuine age of criticism, to which everything must submit. Religion, through its holiness, and legislation, through its majesty, commonly seek to exempt themselves from it. But in this way they excite a just suspicion against themselves, and cannot lay claim to that unfeigned respect that reason grants only to that which has been able to withstand its free and public examination. So this is, Kant bringing out a different age, a different, changing spirit. This is our age of criticism. We're going to investigate all of this stuff. It has to be done. And it's ripened at this time. And again, we are instituting a court of justice by which reason may secure its rightful claims by dismissing all its groundless pretensions, and this not by mere decree, but according to its own eternal and unchangeable laws. This court is a critique of pure reason itself. Yet by this I do not understand a critique of books and systems, but a critique of the faculty of reason in general, in respect of all the cognitions after which reason might strive independently of all experience, and hence the decision about the possibility or impossibility of metaphysics in general, and the determination of its sources as well as its extent with boundaries, all, however, from principles. It is on this path, the only one left, that I have set forth, and I flatter myself in following it. I have succeeded in removing all those errors that have so far put reason into dissension with itself in its non-experiential use. So this is it. I have succeeded in removing all those errors that have so far put reason into dissension. That is what Kant is claiming. There's all these historical errors that reason has got into, and I've removed them. With itself and its non-experiential use, I have not avoided reason's questions by pleading the incapacity of human reason as an excuse. Rather, I have completely specified these questions according to principles. And after discovering the point where reason has misunderstood itself, I have resolved them to reason's full satisfaction. To be sure, the answer to these questions has not turned out as dogmatically enthusiastic lust for knowledge might have expected, for the latter could not be satisfied except through magical powers in which I am not an expert. Yet this was also not the intent of our reason's natural vocation. And the duty of philosophy was to abolish the semblance arising from misinterpretation, even if many prized and beloved illusions have to be destroyed in the process. In this business I have made comprehensiveness my chief aim in view, and I make bold to say that there cannot be a single metaphysical problem that has not been solved here, or at least to the solution of which the key has not been provided in. In fact, pure reason is such perfect unity that if its principle were insufficient for a single one of these questions that arise or set for it by its own nature, then this principle might as well be discarded, because then it also would not be up to answering any of the other questions which complete reliability. Okay. The term critique or criticism was apparently first derived by Kant from Henry Home, Lord Kane's Element of Criticism, in which he referred to judgments in matter of beauty or taste. See Kant's first use of it in an announcement of lectures for 1765. As early as 1769, Kant defines critique as a science not for bringing forth, but for assessing certain things in accordance with rules of perfection. Thus, metaphysics is a science for assessing cognitions of pure reason. So this isn't just what we say, oh, this is a bad, I'm going to do a critique of this person or whatever. This is a very specific philosophical use of that term from Henry Home. Okay. While what I'm saying this, I believe I perceive in the face of the reader an indignation mixed with contempt at claims that are apparently so pretentious and immodest, and yet they are incomparably more modest than those of any author of the commonest program who pretends to prove the simple nature of the soul, or the necessity of first beginning in the world. For such an author pledges himself to extend human cognition beyond all bounds of possible experience. So we are dealing with the question of limits here. What is a legitimate ground? What is a boundary? I mean, we are, if we're doing, when he said the court of law, that's what we're in. We're doing a trial. But we're also looking at logic. Kant first uses it in announcement of lectures. Kant defines critique as a science not for bringing forth, but for assessing certain things in accordance with rules of perfection. So rules of perfection. Logic, maths. Okay. For such an author pledges himself to extend human cognition beyond the bounds of possible experience, of which I humbly admit that this wholly surpasses my capacity. Instead, I have to do merely with reason itself and its pure thinking to gain exhaustive acquaintance with them. I need not seek far beyond myself, because it is in myself that I encounter them. And common logic already also gives me an example of how the simple acts of reason may be fully and systematically enumerated. Only here the question is raised how much I may hope to settle with these simple acts if all the material and assistance of experience are taken away from me. So much for the completeness in reaching each of the ends, and for the comprehensiveness in reaching all of them together, which ends are not proposed arbitrarily, but are set up for us by the nature of cognition itself, as the matter of our critical investigation. Furthermore, certainty and clarity, two things that concern the form of the investigation, are to be viewed as essential demands, which may rightly be made on the author who ventures upon so slippery an undertaking. As far as certainty is concerned, I have myself pronounced the judgment that this kind of inquiry is in no way allowed to hold opinions, and that anything that even looks like a hypothesis is forbidden commodity, which should not be put up for sale, even at the lowest price, but must be confiscated as soon as it is discovered. For every cognition that is supposed to be certain, a priori proclaims that it wants to be held for absolute necessary, and even more, is this true of a determination of all pure cognitions a priori, which is to be the standard and thus even the example of an all apodictic philosophical certainty. Whether I have performed what I have just pledged in that respect remains wholly to the judgment of the reader, since it is appropriate for an author only to present the grounds, but not to judge about their effects on his judges. But in order that he should not inadvertently be the cause of weakening his own arguments, the author may be permitted to note himself those places that, even though they pertain only to the identical end of the work, may be the occasion for some mistrust, in order that he may, in a timely manner, counteract the influence that even the reader's slightest reservation be on this point may have on his judgment over the chief end. I am acquainted with no investigation more important for getting to the bottom of the faculty we call the understanding, and at the same time for the determination of the rules and boundaries of its use, than those I have undertaken in the second chapter of the Transcendental Analytic, under the title Deduction of the Pure Concepts of Understanding. They are also the investigations that have cost me the most, but I hope not unrewarded effort. This inquiry, which goes rather deep, has two sides. One side refers to the objects of pure understanding and is supposed to demonstrate and make comprehensible the objective validity of the concepts a priori, thus it belongs essentially to my ends. The other side deals with pure understanding itself, concerning its possibility and the powers of cognition on which itself rests. Thus it considers in a subjective relation, and although this exposition is of great importance in respect of my chief end, it does not belong essentially to it, because the chief question remains: what and how much can understanding and reason cognize free of all experience, and not how is the faculty of thinking itself possible? Since the latter question is something like the search for the cause of a given effect, and is therefore something like a hypothesis, although, as I will elsewhere take the opportunity to show, this is not in fact how matters stand. It appears as if I am taking the liberty, in this case, of expressing an opinion, and that the reader might therefore be free to hold another opinion. In view of this, I must remind the reader in advance that even in case my subjective deduction does not produce the complete conviction that I expect, the objective deduction that is my primary concern would come into its full strength, on which what is said at pages 92 to 3 should be sufficient by itself. Finally, in regards to clarity, the reader has a right to demand, first, discursive logical clarity through concepts, but then also intuitive aesthetic clarity through intuitions, that is, through examples or other illustrations in concreto. Okay, not that much longer. I have taken sufficient care for the former. That was essential to my undertaking, but was also the contingent cause of the fact that I could not satisfy the second demand, which is less strict but still fair. In the progress of my labour, I have been almost constantly undecided how to deal with this matter. Examples and illustrations always appear necessary to me, and hence actually appeared in their proper place in my first draft. But then I looked at the size of my task and the many objects with which I would have to do, and I became aware that this alone, treated in a dry, merely scholastic manner, would suffice to fill an extensive work. Thus I found it inadvisable to swell it with further with examples and illustrations which are necessary only for a popular aim. Especially this work could never be made suitable for popular use, and real experts in this science do not have so much need for things to be made easy for them, although this would always be agreeable. Here it could also have brought with it something counterproductive. Abbe Terrasson says that if the size of a book is measured not by the number of pages, but by the time needed to understand it, then it can be said many a book that it would be much shorter if it were not so short. So let's see, we have 8 and 9. So here we go. Jean Terrasson, the original French edition. So if anybody's interested in that book there, you can check that out. But on the other hand, if we direct our view toward the intelligibility of a whole of speculative cognition that is wide-ranging and yet is connected in principle, we could with equal right say that many a book would be much clearer if it had not been made quite so clear. For the aids of clarity to clarity help in part, but often confuse in the whole, since the reader cannot quickly enough attain a survey of the whole, and all their bright colours paint over and make unrecognizable the articulation or structure of the system which it matters most when it comes to judging its unity and soundness. It can, as it seems to me, be no small inducement for the reader to unite his effort with that of the author, when he has the prospect of carrying out, according to the outline given above, a great and important piece of work, and that in a complete and lasting way. Now, metaphysics, according to the concepts we will give it of it here, is the only one of the sciences that may promise that little but unified effort, and that indeed in a short time will complete it in such a way that nothing remains to prosperity, except to adapt it in a didactic manner to its intentions, yet without being able to add to its content for the least. For it is nothing but the inventory of all that we possess through reason or ordered systematicity. Nothing here can escape us, because what reason brings forth entirely out of itself cannot be hidden, but is brought to light by reason itself as soon as reason's common principle has been discovered. This perfect unity of this kind of cognition, and the fact that it arises slowly out of pure concepts, without any influence that would extend or increase it from experience or even particular intuition, which would lead to a determinate experience, make this unconditioned completeness not only feasible but also necessary. Dwell in your own house, and you will know how simple your possessions are. Such a system of pure speculative reason I hope myself to deliver under the title of Metaphysics of Nature, which will be not half so extensive, but will be incomparably richer in content than this critique, which is first to display the sources and conditions of possibility and needed to clear and level ground that was completely overgrown. Here I expect from my reader the patience and impartiality of a judge, but there I will expect the cooperative spirit of assistance of a fellow worker. For however completely the principles of the system may be expounded in the critique, the comprehensiveness of the system itself requires also that no derivative concepts should be lacking, which, however, cannot be estimated a priori in one leap, but must be gradually sought out. Likewise, just as in the former the whole synthesis of concepts has been exhausted, so in the latter it would be additionally demanded that the same thing should take place in respect of their analysis, which would be easy and more entertainment than labour. I have only a few more things to remark with respect to the book's printing. Since the beginning of the printing was something delayed, I was able to see only about half of the proof sheets, in which I have come upon a few printing errors, though none that confuse the sense, except one occurring at page A379, fourth line from the bottom, where specific should be read in place of skeptical. The antinomy of pure reason from page A425 to page A461 is arranged in the manner of a table, so that everything belongs to the thesis always continues on the left side, and what belongs to the antithesis on the right, which I did in order to make it easier to compare propositions and counterpropositions with one another. Okay, so we're completing principles. That's what we're doing. So let's go back a little bit. So let's read this here, this paragraph here, because I think there's a lot in this one. As far as certainty is concerned, I have myself pronounced the judgment that in this kind of inquiry, it is in no way allowed to hold opinions, and that anything that even looks like a hypothesis is forbidden. Commodity which should not be put up for sale even in the lowest price, must be confiscated as soon as it is discovered. For every cognition that is supposed to be certain, a priori proclaims that it wants to be held for absolute necessary. And even more, is this true of determination of all pure cognitions a priori, which is to be the standard and thus even the example of apodictic philosophical certainty. Whether I have performed what I have just pledged in that respect remains wholly the judgment of the reader. So let's see. As far as certainty is concerned, I have myself pronounced the judgment in this kind of inquiry. It is in no way allowed to hold opinions. So we're not dealing with opinions, and that anything that looks like a hypothesis is forbidden commodity. So no opinions, no hypothesis, which should not be put up for sale, even at the lowest price. For every cognition that is supposed to be certain a priori proclaims that it wants to be held for absolutely necessary. And even more is this true of a determination of all pure cognitions a priori. So this is what we're dealing with. For every cognition that is supposed to be certain a priori proclaims that it wants to be held for absolutely necessary. And even more is this true of a determination of all pure cognitions a priori, which is to be the standard and thus even the example of all apodictic certainty. Whether I have performed what I have just pledged in that respect remains wholly to the judgment of the reader, since it is appropriate for an author only to present the grounds, but not to judge about their effects on his judges. But in order that he should not be inadvertently be the cause of weakening his own arguments, the author may be permitted to note himself those places that, even though they pertain only to the identical end of the work, may be the occasional occasion for some mistrust, in order that he may, in a timely manner, counteract the influence that even the reader's slightest reservation on this point may have on his judgment over the chief end. I am acquainted with no investigations more important for getting to the bottom of that faculty we call the understanding, and at the same time for the determination of the rules and boundaries of its use, than those I have undertaken in the second chapter of the Transcendental Analytic under the title Deduction of the Pure Concepts of Understanding. They are also the investigations that have cost me the most, but I hope not an unwarranted effort. So we have two sides to this inquiry. One side refers to the objects of pure understanding and is supposed to demonstrate and make comprehensible the objective validity of its concepts a priori. The objects of the pure understanding. And the other side deals with the pure understanding itself concerning the possibility and powers of cognition on which itself rests. So, thus it considers it in a subjective relation, and although its exposition of its great importance in respect to my chief end, it does not belong essentially to it, because the chief question always remains: what and how much understanding and reason cognize free of all experience? Okay. So that is the fundamental question, as far as I can understand. What and how much can understanding and reason cognize free of all experience? So here, the main thing that we're looking for is independent of experience, necessity. We're not looking for an opinion. We're not looking for a hypothesis. For every cognition that is supposed to be certain a priori proclaims that it wants to be held for absolutely necessary, and even more is this true of a determination of all pure cognitions a priori, which is to be the standard and thus even the example of apodictic certainty. So, yeah. That is the preface to Kant's Critique. That is the first preface. So that's what we've just read today. Now, the second preface, so that's what we've just read today. The second preface starts in 119 and goes, that's a good something pages. So that's 112 to 119. That was perfect. The second preface is bigger, as we can see here. Yeah, it's pretty big. So next time we'll read the preface, the second preface. But immediately in the first preface, we're already seeing, of course, what Kant is up to here. Reason doesn't know itself. There's a war going on, a battle for metaphysics, dogmatists, and this is a new age of understanding. So this is also interesting here. This is on page 101. B. Let's go up to B here. A, B. So here, reason. So what does Kant mean by reason? So let's go into the German. To agree with faculty of reason, das Vernunft, Vermögen. The pronoun should have been neuter. Perhaps Kant was taking the antecedent to be reading. Die Vernunft. Okay, anyway, that is me for today. And have a read over this preface. I mean, there's a lot in there. I mean, there's a lot explicitly and implicitly in there. So till next time, take care.